Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. Welcome to the Takeout. We are in Jamie Raskin's Rayburn House office building office. It's mid-afternoon, December 19th. The Capitol is in complete flux, limbo, paralysis. A federal government partial shutdown looms. There is no resolution in sight. Congressman Raskin, how does that sit with you?
Well, first of all, you should add, Major, that we are at John Lewis's beautiful table.
Yes. Bequeathed to your office by John Lewis.
Yes. So we
Georgia congressman and civil rights hero.
So we can make some good trouble here in John's honor. Look, it's a day of chaos and confusion and uncertainty. I know the feeling well from prior Republican government shutdowns. I was here in December of 18 when we went through this. And I mean, it's a terrible feeling because we want to be working on positive legislation, or at the very least, be able to go back and be with our constituents. Instead, we're all waiting around now for them to try to rescue
and then meaning House Republicans.
Yeah, we're waiting for the Republicans to torture out of the wreckage of the last 48 hours some plan for going forward. But remember, we had been negotiating for 7 or 8 weeks between the Democrats and the Republicans, a continuing resolution, which is just a bill to keep the government open. People spent many, many long nights going through it, and we came to a deal. We arrived at a deal. The Senate Democrats were for it. The Senate Republicans were for it. The House Democrats were for it. The House Republicans for it. We were all for it, and we were about to vote. In fact, if Speaker Johnson had called the vote for yesterday morning, instead of continually postponing it through the afternoon, we would not have been derailed.
And something happened.
Something happened. And
something named Elon Musk.
Yes, they used to call it a tweet, and now I don't know if they still call it a tweet or an X missive or an X tweet or something, an X communication.
Yes.
But basically, Elon Musk said, he basically issued an edict that everybody on the Republican side must vote against the bill. And if they don't, he is going to finance a challenge to them and make their life
possibly turn his social media platform against them.
Exactly. So
how many people voted for Elon Musk?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I mean, he's never been on a public ballot. I don't know if he's ever run on a shareholder ballot for something. And I know he couldn't vote for a long time because when he was an immigrant of uncertain status when he came over to the country, which is something that people have written about and talked about. Hey, if he were reflective of what once undocumented immigrants can do to the political system of the country, then count me a skeptic of undocumented immigrants because he really has visited some tremendous damage on our political process.
One of your colleagues today, Rosa DeLauro, called him President Musk.
Well, Donald Trump seems to be scrambling to catch up with Musk. Remember, we had a deal. And, your commitment in the political context is your word, is your honor, and it's the basis of trust in our political system. There was a deal to go forward, and the Senate side supported the bipartisan deal. The House side supported it, and one guy blew it up. I mean, what is Elon Musk, the fourth branch of government? And then Donald Trump, he scrambled to catch up with this guy that he's unleashed on us. And then he says, we should blow up the deal. And he wants to...
Let's get specific for a second.
Yeah.
You have many federal workers in your district. You also have a matter of repairing the Key Bridge.
Yes.
Both were in this deal.
Maryland,
obviously, the federal workers are implicated by any shutdown scenario, but the Key Bridge also.
Yeah, I mean, Maryland suffered a catastrophe with the Key Bridge accident and collision, and there's excellent legislative work that's been done on getting funding for it. Federal funding, the way that we have federal funding for hurricanes and for victims of earthquakes and for victims of other natural disasters and flooding. And so this is aid that's built in so that Maryland can get through this nightmare.
With genuine economic benefit attached to it.
Yes. And then I've got, as you say, 50,000 federal workers in my district, and there are several hundred thousand in Maryland who want to do their jobs serving the American people, whether it's at NIH, it's at the FDA, it's at NOAA, it's at the National Weather Service, it's at NIST, it's Social Security, it's Medicare.
National Institute of Science and Technology, right.
You name it. I mean, the National Institute of Mental Health. The federal workers are delivering programs and services and benefits to the people.
Let me ask you about that, because when President-elect Trump is inaugurated, he has vowed to revisit the Schedule F designation he made in the waning days of his presidency and attempt to therefore dismiss tens of thousands of federal workers. How nervous are your federal worker constituents about that? How much do you think that is a real threat to their livelihoods?
Well, the constituents I have who are federal workers are American citizens who have devoted their careers to serving the American people. So some of them are doctors and scientific researchers at NIH working on the diseases of our day, cystic fibrosis and multiple sclerosis and sickle cell anemia and lung cancer and colon cancer and malignant narcissistic personality disorder. They are out there working on the diseases that confront our people. And that has been a bipartisan commitment for decades. We've got people at NOAA, at the National Weather Service, who are doing the actual work to determine if there's a hurricane coming. So we don't have a politician pull out a Sharpie and say, oh no, it's not coming to Florida, it's going to Alabama, right? Causing mass confusion and chaos. So you're not ever going to hear me bashing federal workers.
Oh, I know, but is this a real threat to them?
Well, it is a real threat to them, and it is more importantly a real threat to the work that they do for all of us.
Is there a way, if President Trump goes down that road, to stop him either legislatively or legally?
So
Biden administration put an executive order in to try to slow it down or block it. Trump could rescind that.
Right. Congress has never passed Schedule F. This is an effort to attack,
to reclassify these federal workers,
the professional civil service, by taking people out of the civil service where you need to have rigorous qualifications and where you are engaged in objective, neutral scientific research or policy work or what have you, and instead to reclassify these people as political flunkies and acolytes and sycophants for the president.
Going back to the patronage system that civil service attempted to, if not eradicate, but diminish.
That's right. Well, I mean, the whole purpose of the civil service was to make it that government jobs would go to the people who could actually do the government jobs, and they wouldn't be no-show, fluffy political jobs that, you know, my cousin Vinny got for his nephew.
At the whim of a sitting president.
Exactly.
Right.
So that has been an historic success for us, and that's how modern democratic governments work.
Small d.
Small r, small d, Republican democratic governments. That's how governments work that are not under the direct control of a dictator. So the theory being advanced by Trump and his people is that of the unitary executive. Everybody who works in the executive branch should be directly under the president and take orders from the president, even if they're on a board or agency, even if they're on the Securities and Exchange Commission, even if they're the FBI director, things that have been traditionally independent, like the Department of Justice. Everything is now subsumed under the president. So it is a semi-monarchical model they have of a president. In our Constitution, Article 2 says that the president's core responsibility is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. That's laws that are passed by Congress, like Social Security and Medicare and the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the Affordable Care Act and the Voting Rights Act. Not whatever the president wants you to do, but rather the enforcement of the actual laws that have been passed by the people's representatives.
That is the voice of Jamie Raskin. We'll continue our conversation on segment 2 of The Takeout in just one moment.
To be a president, whether you're Joe Biden or Donald Trump, is not to be a king, is not to be a monarch. It's to be governed by law.
Welcome back to The Takeout. Welcome back to the Rayburn House office building of Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, member of the House. We'll get to his ascension to the ranking Democrat position on the Judiciary Committee momentarily. I want to ask you, we'll get back to the shutdown real quick, not on the practicalities of it, but I wonder if you think it is a prism into something that may bedevil President Trump 2.0, which is infighting within his own ranks, not implacable resistance from Democrats.
Well, that goes with the territory, and it goes without saying that we're going to see that.
But I mean, in a really particular way, like purity tests and the kinds of things that hyper-ideologues go through once they assume full power or think they have it.
Yeah, there will be a nonstop litany of ideological purity tests. The problem is that they are ideologues, but they all seem to have different ideologies, right? I mean, some of these people are Silicon Valley tech bros who basically think they are gods and they should govern everybody else. They don't have respect for constitutional democracy and the idea of one person, one vote. We saw that in what's happening yesterday and today now with Elon Musk literally using his status as the wealthiest person in the world to blow up our legislative process and say he's going to use his money to take down any Republican who actually participates in a legislative bipartisan compromise, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one ideology. There are also people there who are authoritarians and want to model us after Putin's Russia or Orban's Hungary. They want Christian white nationalism installed through a takeover of the civil service, a purge of expert civil servants and replacement with party operatives. A lot of these people admire, well, Donald Trump is one of them. They admire communist dictators like Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin, who was head of the KGB.
Says complimentary things about Xi Jinping.
Vladimir Putin said that the single greatest disaster of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. So these are the people who actually admire communist bureaucrats and autocrats. None of them ever, to my knowledge, cites Thomas Jefferson, Tom Paine, John Adams, much less Abraham Lincoln, the founder of the Republican Party, Frederick Douglass, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the great presidents and the great leaders of American history. It's really bizarre for people who say America first, and they spend all of their time fawning over foreign dictators.
What about all the billionaires making their way down to Mar-a-Lago to see Trump and donate to his inaugural committee?
Well, we had bargained for a president who thinks he's a monarch, but we had not bargained for a complete oligarchy of billionaires who, like in Putin's Russia, think that they can take over large parts of the government and do with it what they will. But I think you have to view what's taking place as the emergence of a Putin-like oligarchical system in America, where Donald Trump, who himself has no interest in pedestrian public goods like healthcare or education, is really interested in hanging around with fellow billionaires, the richest people in the world, and empowering them to do whatever they want with public resources.
And you know what the Trump response will be? We had an election where a lot of this was thrown at me, and I won, and you lost, so you're going to take it.
Well, we could talk about the election for as long as he wants to talk about the election. There was an election in 2020 where he lost by more than 7 million votes, and he did not accept that because he doesn't accept our constitutional order, but he rather attacked the election. He incited a violent insurrection against the union. They tried to replace the actual electoral college results with fraudulent, counterfeit electoral college results. So we lost an election in 2024, not by 7 million votes, but by 3 million votes. We accept that. We've not tried to overthrow the election or the constitutional order. But in our system, Donald Trump should understand by now, to be a president, whether you're Joe Biden or Donald Trump, is not to be a king, is not to be a monarch. It's to be governed by law and to be governed by the separation of powers and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So if they do things that are violating the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the rule of law and the democracy, we are going to hit back hard because we're defending the American system of government.
How much does the Supreme Court immunity decision complicate that?
It complicates it a lot. I mean, Donald Trump was able to pack our Supreme Court in order to overturn Roe versus Wade and destroy the reproductive rights, the fundamental privacy rights and healthcare rights of women. He's bragged about that. He's boasted about that. And now these people can hang around to help him do other things like overturn more than 2 centuries of understanding that a president is not above the law. We have no kings here. It's in the Constitution. We have no titles of nobility. The president's job.
And yet the Supreme Court said official acts are immune, presumptively and otherwise. You can't even question motive or its relationship to underlying criminal statute.
Official yes.
Act.
Trump's gerrymandered Supreme Court has said that a president's acts that are covered under the core functions of the presidency are presumptively immune from criminal prosecution, which is an astounding thing for it to hold. And I think it will go down in history as a terrible Supreme Court decision, like the Dred Scott decision is a terrible Supreme Court decision, and lots of decisions have been overturned. In the meantime, he's got that immunity, but he doesn't have immunity from a civil lawsuit if he's violating the rights of the people. And he does not have, he can't extend his immunity to the people around him. If he gives a clearly unlawful order to his subordinates to go out and to commit, they can't commit it without exposing themselves to criminal prosecution. So, even this terrible decision is cabined by the contours of its own limits.
I want to ask you about something that appeared in the Washington Post, a newspaper I know you probably subscribe to. It's in your office foyer. Robert Shapiro, who's a political scientist at Columbia University, wrote this week that President Biden ought to offer Donald Trump a blanket pardon. And he said one of the benefits of that would be that it would enable President Trump, and I quote, to devote all of his administration's attention to governing instead of seeking revenge and retribution against his enemies. What do you think about that?
Well, if that would work, then I think there's a credible argument to be made for that. The question is whether that would actually work. I mean, we are in...
And this person, Robert Shapiro, also argues by accepting this pardon, Trump would be accepting some manner of implied guilt.
Yeah.
Which he said that would be good for history and for to blunt the revisionist history of January 6th and everything attached to it.
A presidential pardon would apply only in the federal context. So it would not apply to his existing state criminal conviction for cooking the books and, the various forms of financial misstatements he made as part of the hush money plot with the porn star mistress. So that would be left intact. For something by this, thinking aloud. It would apply presumably to the Jack Smith prosecution. I assume this is what the article is about. And of course, the Supreme Court has made it very difficult to pursue that prosecution anyway. So I don't know. Look, I think that all of these things should be on the table if they can help us get through the nightmare of all of the threatened prosecutions and persecutions that President Trump is talking about. I mean, they've been, talking about going after Liz Cheney simply for doing her legislative work in a way that is completely covered by the speech and debate clause. It's not a crime for somebody to go out and find witnesses to a violent insurrection. And
one of your colleagues, a Republican, issued a report this week saying that Liz Cheney tampered with a witness and therefore should be criminally prosecuted.
Yeah. to talk to witnesses is not to tamper with witnesses. And they've given no specificity in terms of what the witness tampering would consist of. As far as I know, Cassidy Hutchinson testified flawlessly and beautifully and made no mistakes. And certainly nobody's accused her of perjury. Nobody has contradicted anything that she said. So how did Liz Cheney suborn perjury or tamper with a witness? What did she do? She encouraged her to come forward and tell the truth. There's nothing against the law in that.
The voice of Jamie Raskin, Democratic congressman from Maryland and soon to be ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Segment 3 of the Takeout coming your way in just one moment.
We're talking about the pardon of people, not because of anything they've done, but because of a president making outrageous threats against them.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, is our special guest. Continuing the conversation about the Washington Post, did it bother you at all that the Washington Post did not publish its endorsement for Kamala Harris?
You know, speaking as a politician, nobody pays attention to newspaper political endorsements anymore. And I've got to say that's true of my hometown paper, the Washington Post.
Fact check, true.
Well, you know, when I first ran for Congress, I was not endorsed. They endorsed my friend Kathleen Matthews. I was still able to win that election. So I don't think it makes that big of a difference. I mean, what people were upset about.
Indicative of industry, tech, billionaire kowtowing?
Well, right. And I think that is the red flag. What people are concerned about is the idea that our most important media institutions and newspapers are going to be intimidated by the power of big money, like Elon Musk, and state power as embodied in Donald Trump, who has shown himself perfectly willing and eager to convert the White House and his control over the executive branch of government into a weapon against people who would dare to disagree with him on something.
In that light, ABC News has settled with President Trump, $16 million to his presidential foundation over something George Stephanopoulos said on the air. Does that worry you?
Yeah, it definitely worries me because the merits of that seem to be in favor of ABC. For the life of me, I can't understand why they would have paid millions of dollars in the particulars of that case. And we can talk about what happened if you want to get into it. But it certainly did not seem to me like any kind of $15 million complaint. It struck me as a frivolous nuisance complaint, and maybe they could pay him $200,000 or $200 just to go away. But the media has got to stand up for the First Amendment. New York Times versus Sullivan says that a public official only has a cause of action against a newspaper or a TV station if they publish a defamatory lie and it's uttered with actual malice, meaning they know it's a lie or they are recklessly indifferent to the truth in that context. And I don't think that anything remotely close to that was proven here. So I would have hoped that for the cause of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, ABC would have hung tough. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why they gave $15 million to the Donald Trump library, which sounds almost like an oxymoron. But.
And right after that, President Trump, or President-elect Trump, and a lawyer representing him, sues the Des Moines Register over a public policy poll he didn't like.
I mean,
alleging consumer fraud.
Right. Well, these people have got to hang tough. I mean, that's just comical. Is
it about something larger, do you fear?
Yes. I mean, this is all about whether the press are going to be officially treated as the enemies of the people, as Donald Trump has called you guys, or whether we're going to understand that the press are the people's best friends in a democracy. It is the press that brings the facts of the day and the light of truth to public discourse. How are we going to give the people transparency into the Pentagon, into the Department of State, into the White House, into Congress, the House and the Senate, the federal bureaucracy, if we don't have an active and vigilant press. That's what New York Times versus Sullivan is all about. Basically, we're going to leave the press alone unless they are deliberately lying about somebody in a way that disgraces them and defames their character. Mm-hmm. But without that active, willful lying, then the press should be able to proceed. The idea that you would have a once and future president suing a newspaper because he doesn't like the results of a poll is just laughable and ridiculous.
Related to that, recently at a gala in New York, Steve Bannon said that there should be widespread prosecutions of those in the media who conspired with Merrick Garland to perpetrate various hoaxes against Donald Trump. He name-checked Rachel Maddow. He name-checked others. Do you take those rhetorical outbursts seriously, or do you regard them as just rhetorical outbursts?
No, I mean, you've got to take them seriously because they've proven themselves perfectly willing to do things like sue ABC and sue newspapers. And
he sued CBS.
Those could be crushing verdicts if they go through, and it's expensive to defend against them. I mean, if you are the richest person in the world, or if you're a billionaire, that's chump change. You're very willing to throw that out there. But if you're a media entity, especially these days, that's real money that it's costing you. But notice the turnaround here, Major. We've got a situation where they pose valiantly as defenders of freedom of speech and the First Amendment and the right of racists and anti-Semites to say whatever they want on the internet and the social media. And then they bring the full power of their offices and their wealth against newspapers and TV and so on utterly fraudulent grounds, but just to put the press on the defensive. I thought that they were supposed to be big supporters of the First Amendment.
Back to Liz Cheney. Do you think it would be wise for her to accept and for President Biden to confer a preemptive pardon to protect her? I mean, or others who have been implicated by the language of those in the Trump inner circle?
I mean, I don't want to get into particular cases. I think that's entirely within the executive branch prerogative to deal with those things. And it is as complicated as any other legal case. There are pros and cons, and it's especially complicated today because we're talking about pardoning people who have not done anything wrong, much less committed a crime. And we're talking about the pardon of people, not because of anything they've done, but because of a president making outrageous threats against them. That's historically unprecedented, right? And so anybody who's contemplating one of those pardons has to weigh whatever added measure of legal security they might gain from accepting such a pardon against the idea that the extreme right will put a target on your back for accepting a pardon, right? Because you know that they will go after you in any event. And that's all in the context where Trump has already radically abused the pardon power. I mean, he pardoned Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Dinesh D'Souza. I mean, just totally promiscuous political use of the pardon. And I know they're on President Biden's case about pardoning his son after he actually has been prosecuted in a way which at least arguably is disproportionate or incompatible with the way other people have been treated in similar cases. But regardless of that, find me one father or mother in America who would not have done what Joe Biden did in that case.
Are you comfortable with it?
I'm uncomfortable with it because it makes you uncomfortable that a great president like President Biden had to choose. But, put it this way, as a father, I'm perfectly comfortable with it, as a public official, there's always that tug between a personal family loyalty and duty, and then one that you might see in public. And there, I don't think it's because it's in any sense indefensible. It's not. It's perfectly defensible because I think it's very hard to find other people who were prosecuted for a misstatement on a gun application relating to drug abuse. That's just not the kind of thing people go to jail for. But the problem was that he had said he wasn't going to do it before. That's what people are giving him a hard time about. But if you weigh that against what I think any father or mother in America would do, it's not something that keeps me up at night.
There are also people who criticize the pardon for going back 11 years and talking about things he may have done. And that 11 years begins, if you go back 11 years, to his role with Burisma. And that catches people's throats like, wait a minute, why that specific? Why reach back that far? Does that trouble you?
I haven't looked that closely at that question, so I don't want to opine on that, on the breadth of the pardon. And when you look at it historically, like I was checking out this pardon that Jimmy Carter offered, a mass amnesty.
Let me hold you on that because we're coming up on a break. But we'll pick up on that with Jimmy Carter, mass amnesty for those who defied the draft back in Vietnam. We'll pick up on that in one moment with Jamie Raskin.
It's not consistent with the rule of law in a civilized society for people to just go out and shoot someone.
Welcome back to Takeout. Welcome back to the Rayburn House office building of Jamie Raskin, House Democrat, Maryland. Continuing your thought on Jimmy Carter and those who, quote unquote, dodged the draft.
Well,
and the blanket amnesty or pardon conferred in their direction.
Carter wanted to move the country beyond a period of profound division and polarization around the Vietnam War and around people who either turned in their draft cards, burned their draft cards, or just skipped out or figured some other way of getting out of it. And so what he did was he issued a pardon to people who might be prosecuted for any offense within a decade-long period relating to the selective service and other related statutes. And some people said, well, that's too broad. You don't know what each of those people did, which of course you didn't. But he, in the interest of moving forward, he said that's something I'm going to do. And that has happened at other points in our history during the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. And I think it raises all kinds of fascinating and difficult constitutional, legal, and moral questions that we can talk about. But they're very in-depth, and it's not as easy as, are you for it or against it? I think they really bear difficult scrutiny, and you've got to put yourself in the position of the president who's extending or offering the pardon, and you've got to put yourself in the position of the person receiving it. You got to put it in the position of the people who were their victims. If it was a crime with victims, and you got to put yourself in the position of the public today. I mean, the once and future President Donald Trump is talking about pardoning hundreds of people who engaged in violent insurrection against the Union and the Constitution and attacked federal officers and D.C. Metropolitan Police officers on January 6th, 2021. And one principal overriding question in that case is, what are the public safety implications of releasing hundreds of people, Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and other members of extremist groups, as well as people who are not members of extremist groups, back into the general population? Can we say in each individualized case, which is why the Pardon Office looks at individual cases and the merits and the demerits of a pardon in a particular case, can we say these people are no longer a threat to public safety, no longer a threat to the police, no longer a threat to democratic institutions?
Will you attend this next Trump inauguration?
I haven't fully thought it through, Major. I've been very busy with other things. I didn't go to the last one. And because Donald Trump has been leveling a series of threats against people like Liz Cheney, who are constitutional patriots, who did nothing other than live up to their oaths of office, I tend to bet I'm going not to go, but I don't want to say definitively yet. I'm going to think about it some more. It's Martin Luther King's birthday. It's hard for me to contemplate spending Dr. King's birthday there in that context, where there's such a threatened assault on civil rights and civil liberties of different populations. But I'll think about it and I'll let you know for sure.
One of the through lines of this conversation, and it's one of the through lines of your career, is the rule of law. And I wonder what thoughts you have on not only Luigi Mangione, the crime he's accused of committing in broad daylight in New York, walking up behind a CEO of a prominent health insurer in this country, allegedly murdering him, and then some of the public reaction casting him as some kind of laudable or near laudable vigilante against an unjust economic system or
Yes.
healthcare system in this country. What thoughts do you have?
Well, it's horrific. The whole reason we have a rule of law system is to prevent vengeance and people taking individualized vigilante action, regardless of how noble they subjectively think their purpose is. And regardless of how objectively noble it might be, it doesn't make any difference. Under the rule of law, we don't take the law into our own hands and go out and commit crimes. And I know that there's been a lot of public sympathy for him because the victim of this terrible crime was the head of a health insurance company. And there's great public consternation about the state of healthcare in America and how difficult it is for people to get health insurance coverage in the first place, and then when they have health insurance coverage, to get their claims met by the companies. And that is a problem that we need to be addressing, and people have tried to address it in lots of ways. A lot of us have been fighting for a Medicare for all system, and I've supported it ever since I got to Congress. A lot of us have been fighting for the kind of national health care that they've got in Canada or France or UK or Japan or you name it, in the vast majority of the nations in the civilized, industrialized world. Other people have been trying to argue for it in the movies. I think about Michael Moore with his movie Sicko, but it's not consistent with the rule of law in a civilized society for people to just go out and shoot someone. So I am not somebody who celebrates or encourages vigilantism. I thought it was sick when Donald Trump would go to his rallies and tell his rally goers to physically attack somebody who came to heckle or carry a sign against him. And he would say, he would brag about how in the old days they used to beat the daylights out of people and go ahead and smack him, and I'll pay for the legal fees. I think that's outrageous for anybody to say, but especially somebody who wants to be the chief law enforcement officer in the country. And that's why I thought it was the absolutely right thing to do for the House of Representatives to impeach Donald Trump for inciting insurrection against us on January 6th, when Trump got up and said, you got to go and fight, and you got to fight like hell. And if you don't, we're not going to have a country anymore. And he used the word fight more than 20 times. He likes to talk about a little phrase his staff tucked in there about, and now we're going to march peacefully and patriotically down to the Capitol, where mayhem and violence ensued. And he watched it all on TV, and he didn't do anything to stop it for several hours. And in fact, he sent out another tweet further inciting and exhorting the crowd, saying Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what needs to be done. So we've got to be clear that incitement to violence or committing violence for political reasons is not acceptable under the rule of law.
Or for economic reasons, whatever your level of grievance. And those celebrating in whatever way, social media and otherwise, Luigi Mangione, are wrong.
They are wrong to take the law into their own hands and to engage in vigilante violence. It's just not.
Or to encourage others to think about it.
No, people shouldn't be doing that. And not only is it wrong and obviously cruel and devastating to the families of people who lose their lives this way, but it's not an effective form of social change. If people think they're somehow going to be a social or political hero doing that? I don't think so. And I think that John Brown, for example, was somebody who was viewed as a madman. And I don't think he helped the cause of abolition or the North in the Civil War, but I know there's an historical debate about that.
No doubt. We are at the desk, as you mentioned earlier, of John Lewis. Luigi Mangione did not engage in good trouble.
No, that was bad trouble, and I don't think it does the cause of national health care any favors, and it obviously is the most serious crime to take it into your hands to destroy somebody else's life.
The voice of Jamie Raskin. That's it for this week, folks. Stay tuned for your Takeout Outtake Especial. That's next.
We are the party that is really going to stand up for the interests of the vast majority of the American people.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. Jamie Raskin is our guest, Democrat, Maryland, House of Representatives. We only have 3 minutes, so give me your postmortem on what happened in 2024, the election.
I mean, historians will be debating it. We didn't get as many votes as we should have gotten. I think the Democrats did a great job on ground mobilization and canvassing and door knocking and so on. I think we got badly outflanked on social media and communication. And I think we ended up communicating to the same people over and over again. And we need to break out of that, obviously. But again, I don't want to overstate these results. We beat them by more than 7 million votes in 2020, just 4 years ago. The Republicans proceeded to lie about that and try to overthrow the election, and Donald Trump has never accepted it. They beat us by 3 million votes in 2024. We've accepted that because we're constitutional patriots, but we're going to go out, and they have already injected extraordinary chaos into the legislative system and the political process. And we're going to go out and we're going to explain that we are the party that believes the government is an instrument of the common good. They believe the government is an instrument for private money making for the monarch who gets in and the oligarchs who surround him. And we're going to win in the 2026 congressional elections.
To your tactical point about door knocking and social media, a couple of Democrats looking back on the election said, you know, it may be possibly true that the digital space, social media, is the new form of door knocking, that the old methods of voter mobilization have to be rethought. Is that what you're driving at?
I think we do it all. There are a lot of people who are not online, especially a lot of older people, and you need to go and
meet them where they are.
Talk to them. Lots of younger people are definitely online, and they're in a lot of podcasts and the social media sites that we did not do a good job of, penetrating and inhabiting with our political views and ideas. So we've got to be much more universal in our communications approach. Now, there's no doubt that there were some big structural things going on. I mean, everybody who was an incumbent around the world during the bad inflation that followed the COVID-19 crisis lost, whether they were on the left or they were on the right or in the center, they lost. And immigration was a big issue along with inflation. But I still believe that the vast majority of Americans got their news about those big issues through very biased sources. Fox News and the right-wing media, they are the mainstream media right now. They grew up attacking the mainstream media, but they are now dominant. And so we got to figure out a way to reach people, not just through CBS and CNN and MSNBC, but through the mechanisms that have built a following on the right wing. And we believe that there are huge contradictions within the MAGA movement that are already starting to rip them apart. There are clashing ambitions, and we are the party that is really going to stand up for the interests of the vast majority of the American people.
The voice of Jamie Raskin. We'll see you next week, folks.